reason that the dollar became the world's reserve currency was because we dominated the world economically. But not only did we dominate the world economically, the dollar was backed by gold. The dollar was basically a weight of gold. And anybody that held dollars held gold because you could take your dollars to the US government and they would give you gold at a prefixed rate. But today, I would say it's the reverse. The reason that the United States is still the dominant economy is because the dollar is the reserve currency. I think while the dollar status was once a product or a byproduct of America's dominance, that dominance is now completely dependent on that status because when the United States got that status, we used it like a crutch. And now we have been dependent on that crutch.
In today's video, we'll dive into the shifting role of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency and its implications for the American economy. We'll explore the insights shared by Peter Schiff, a renowned economist, and examine how the US economy has become increasingly reliant on the reserve currency status of the dollar. Stick around until the end, as we discuss the potential risks and consequences associated with this dependency.
It's what enabled us to outsource all of our manufacturing. And as the US economy became less and less competitive due to regulations and taxes and things like that, rather than pushing back against the regulations and taxes, we were just able to run deficits and import the stuff that we couldn't produce because of the dollar's reserve status. So it's like because we relied on that crutch, we became crippled and then needed the crutch because initially we didn't need it, but it was given to us. And so we decided to use it rather than just walk on our own 2 feet. But now we're so dependent on that crutch because the economy is, our legs have atrophied. We need it, and you take it away, and everything's going to collapse. And it seems that Powell doesn't really understand that. Now he got another question about the balance sheet. He was asked, is he concerned about it because it keeps growing? And the congressman who asked him this question actually asked him a good question because he pointed out the inherent problem, which is when the economy is bad, we ramp up the balance sheet very quickly when anything goes wrong. But then when supposedly times are good, the Fed is very slow to shrink the balance sheet. And so that you never withdraw in good times all the liquidity that you put in bad times. And then when you get the next economic downturn, since you've never drained all the liquidity that you put in during the last downturn, when you add more liquidity, the level keeps going up. And so the size of the balance sheet is going to grow in perpetuity because before the Fed ramped it up to 4.5 trillion, then it was able to bring it back down to 3.5 trillion, never got back down to 1 trillion. And then all of a sudden we get in trouble and it's 8 trillion or 8, whatever it was, 8, almost 9 trillion actually. And so now it's starting to come back down, but we're probably not even going to get below 8 trillion before they have to blow it up, to 12 or 15 trillion or whatever. So the point is, are you worried about this? Because it keeps on growing. And Powell really didn't think it was a problem. He said, yeah, we're concerned about the growth of the balance sheet, but that's kind of where it ended. I mean, never really talked about how bad it's going to get or address the underlying question. How is it going to stop growing? Because and he mentioned, well, we're shrinking it faster now than we did before. Yes, but it's so much bigger now than it was before. And it's still massive. It's still nowhere near the level it was when it stopped growing before. So he is really, sugarcoating the degree of this problem. Now, another point he tried to make, which I disagree with, is he kept talking about our strong labor market and how the U.S. economy is really being driven by this strong labor market. And we don't have a strong labor market. I mean, I don't care that we have a low unemployment rate. I don't care that we're creating a bunch of jobs. That in and of itself doesn't mean we have a strong labor market. You have to look at the quality of the jobs, and you got to talk about, real wages. So if the jobs that are being created are by and large low paying jobs, part time jobs, that doesn't really smack of economic strength. The fact that so many people are forced to moonlight, the fact that one job doesn't provide enough income to cover your bills, the fact that so many people have to take second and third jobs, that is not evidence of a strong labor market. In a strong labor market, you just need one job, and you can earn enough money in that one job to cover your bills. You don't need all these part-time jobs in a strong labor market. Also, real wages have been falling. That's a sign of a weak labor market where workers don't have the bargaining power to get a real wage increase. So everything to me doesn't show that we have a strong labor market. We have a weak economy, and so people have to work a lot harder. The fact that people who are retired, the fact that inflation has so increased the cost of living that they can't afford to stay retired, that they've got to go back into the workforce and take one of these crappy low-paying jobs, that is not a strong labor market powering the economy. It's the weak economy that's forcing more people back into the labor market, and it's forcing more people to have second and third jobs. But these are not good jobs. Meanwhile, our trade deficits continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, another point that Powell made, because he was asked about this, and a lot of times it's to try to provide cover to Biden, because the Republicans want to blame inflation on Biden, and the Democrats want to say, well, look at Europe. Biden's not president of, in the EU, or look at all these other countries. The UK just came out with worse than expected inflation last week. I mean, I think like 8.5%. I mean, they've got a big problem there in the United Kingdom, and so they want to say, yeah, you see, it's not Biden's fault, because how could you blame him for the inflation in the United Kingdom? And so Powell says, yes, looking around the world, it's obvious the one thing that all these countries have in common is COVID. And so because of COVID, that's why we have inflation, because of these supply chain bottlenecks. But of course, what Powell conveniently overlooks when he claims the one thing they have in common is COVID, no, what they have in common is the way they responded to COVID by creating inflation. That's what they have in common. They all printed a bunch of money because of COVID. They slashed interest rates because of COVID. They ran bigger budget deficits because of COVID. That's what they have in common. And it didn't start with COVID. All of these countries that are now experiencing elevated inflation, this is not an accident. It's because they all were pursuing inflationary monetary policies by design. Everybody, the UK, the Bank of England, or the ECB, the Bank of Japan, the Fed, what they all had in common is what they all said: we don't have enough inflation. Inflation is too low. They were all doing quantitative easing. They all had 0% or negative interest rates. Those are the mistakes that they all made in common. And that's why they're all suffering the same consequence, which is inflation. So inflation was manufactured by government and by central banks, both in the United States and in Europe, because the governments made the same mistakes on both sides of the Atlantic.
To conclude, the US dollar's role as the world's reserve currency has evolved significantly over time, with the US economy now heavily reliant on this status. As Peter Schiff explained, this dependency poses risks and challenges for the US economy. Moving forward, it is crucial to recognize the importance of addressing underlying economic issues to build a resilient and sustainable economy. That wraps up today's video on the changing role of the US dollar and its implications for the American economy. If you found this information insightful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.